All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming, and apologies that we had to reschedule from the snow day, but thank you all so much for coming to this event. I remember when Kristin, we were at dinner and she first told me that her book was coming out, and I'm like, we have to do a reading, like it has to be done. And now finally the book is out and we are doing a reading, and it's super exciting. This is the book right here, Hematology, which is available at our brother's bookstore. Is that right? Your brother's bookstore downtown and at Blue Stocking Social. Is that right? And do you have signed copies there?
There are signed copies at, is it your brother's bookstore or our brother's bookstore?
I think it's your brother's book. It's actually my former student, so I should know these things.
Okay. At your brother's bookstore, they're signed. The one at Blue Stocking are not signed, but I have copies in my office that I can provide signed if anybody's interested.
Great, thank you. So if you're interested in buying a book normally, if we were doing this in person, we would of course have books for sale afterwards. But there are two local bookstores. Always support your local bookstore, your brother's bookstore and Blue Stocking Social, or support your local professor by going straight to Dr. LaFollette. So I have an introduction to read about Dr. LaFollette, and then we will let Dr. LaFollette, of course, take over and do her reading, and just ask questions in the Q&A. And I will get to those at the end of the session. We will open up the Q&A and answer those questions. So, oh, by the way, I'm Amy Munns. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm an associate professor in the English department, and we are, of course, thrilled to have Dr. LaFollette with us in the department and here tonight. Kristin LaFollette is a writer, scholar, and professor at the University of Southern Indiana, where she researches and teaches courses on writing, rhetoric, and gender and sexuality studies. She is also active in the creative writing world as a poet, essayist, and editor. She serves as the art editor at Mud Season Review and is the author of Hematology, the award-winning winner of the 2021 Harbor Editions Laureate Prize, and Body Parts, which is also a winner of the 2017 GFT Press Chapbook Contest. She serves as a creative writer and medical humanities specialist on the board of advisors at the Blood Project, an educational platform that works toward building bridges between the humanities, science, medicine, and patient care. She received an MA in creative writing from Indiana University South Bend and a Ph.D. in rhetoric and writing studies from Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Dr. LaFollette, take it away. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Munns, for that introduction. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your Thursday to be here this evening. I'm so excited to share some poems from Hematology. And even though we aren't together in person, as Dr. Munns said, I do have copies of the book in my office on campus if anyone's interested, and I can provide signed copies. And then, of course, there's also some copies at your brother's bookstore and at Blue Stocking Social here in Evansville. So I wanted to just start out by giving kind of a brief introduction to the book before I jump in. The poems in this collection really came about because of my love for both medicine and writing, which you can probably tell from the title and from the image on the cover. But when I was growing up, I always wanted to be a doctor, a medical doctor, and my senior year of high school, I was in an internship program for students in the medical field. And so we spent one semester in the classroom learning and then spent the second semester in various clinical and hospital rotations. So this experience, it was an amazing experience. It only made me want to be a doctor more. So I was a pre-med major in college for 3 years. And then the last year I was in the program, I had, as college students often do, sort of a crisis where I suddenly wasn't sure what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I was concerned about graduating with this pre-med degree, which was actually a biology degree that I might never use. So I had always loved writing, and conversations with my advisor led me to sort of test the waters as an English major. And my first ever creative writing class as an undergraduate was really a light bulb moment for me, where I saw that I could intersect all these different things that I loved, writing and science and medicine. And as a side note, that first creative writing class that I took was with poet and professor David Dodley. And he really helped my writing grow and develop during my time as an English major, but he also wrote one of the blurbs on the back of my book. So for all the students listening, this is a reminder to network and build relationships with your professors now, because they will find great joy in supporting and championing your work down the road. So this book is really a tribute to my passion for the medical humanities, and it focuses on embodied experience and identity and family connections and loss and grief as well. So there is a poem in the collection called Hematology, but overall blood is a frequent and consistent theme in the poem. So you'll hear that come up as well. And the first few poems I'm going to read are from the first section of the book, which really is kind of centered on the complexities of family relationships. And as the other blurb on the back of the book writes, I think it says it better than I could. It focuses on what families share and what they don't, what blood can rouse and what it can't. So these poems also touch on life in the Midwest, as I grew up in both Iowa and Indiana. So you'll see many Midwestern references as well. But the first poem that I'm going to read from the book is called Blue Boy, and I wrote this one for my youngest brother. And when you became the youngest, you earned blood, and the first thing we saw was blood. You were a papier-mâché animal, and I rinsed the pulp from your body, cracked you open and explored what was inside, found twigs and sticks turned to powder, little bruises pink with scar tissue and soft fiber, the price of being born reckless with so much blood pouring down your back. I had to create space for you in my mind, new soil for our shared history and root. Had to find delicate hands so I could touch your transparent skin. 1996, that's when the trouble started. At first, I counted your bones and wondered how you could come from such cold and snow, but you moved, and I didn't know then how attached I would become, how I would make you into the same kind of winged bird as me, how you were never meant to be kept, your December body, both hunter and arrow. All right. And this next one I'm going to read is called The Organisms Phenotype. I've always known the colors of blood. In a field near our house, a deer with its organs removed by my father's hands, the purple red meat, a damp smell like brown leaves and bathwater. I was the adult, the pouring of it all out of an open wound in my brother's head. I knew his head blood shining and slick on the linoleum floor of my mother's kitchen. Recognized it when, at 17, I saw my own blood fill a plastic bag in a high school gymnasium. To fill another body, I learned typing as a lab assistant. Be positive, liquid, like a full hot sea. What we breathe is air, blood from bone. We are made of letters, all of us letters, a pedigree of small rooms. So I wrote a series of poems for this collection called Genetic to really explore this concept of what families share. So I'm going to read Genetic Part 2, and this poem is an explanation, or maybe more of an exploration, of the connections that we have with our parents. And this poem in particular is about my mother. So this is called Genetic Part 2. I feel my bones shifting the older I get, breaking and reforming into shapes that more closely resemble my mother. I feel a twinge in my lower back, the same one she's complained about for years, a problem recently fixed with surgery. The doctor hollowing out bits of her spine to make space for a nerve he described as angry and aggravated, words people have probably used to describe both of us at one point or another. In the hospital after the surgery, I realized how I always thought of her as God. And as I helped her lift a can of Sprite to her mouth, I remembered what's left of our tibias, skin, and blood. How my oldest brother always mistakes my voice for hers on the phone. I handed her a bag of crackers, watched her remove them one at a time, take small bites out of the corners and chew. What I know now, my skeleton is burdensome like my mother's, quick to take on water and slow to heal. All right, so the last one I'm going to read from this first section is called Adult Teeth. And this one is also about my youngest brother. So he is 8 years younger than me. So growing up, I felt like I had to look out for him and really take care of him. So this poem is kind of about the passage of time and his transition from childhood to adulthood, and I guess sort of how quickly it all happened. So this is called Adult Teeth. Over many days and months, I felt your bones slowly break and split, the pieces pulled back together and fused as you grew into an adult skeleton with adult teeth. You once rushed into a busy street to gather up a yellow balloon with your arms, brought it back to me as offering and benefaction. I always thought of you as my own, even though you weren't, but we still shared plasma and ion, a sameness that could be felt as your feet hit the ground in a sprint, spray of rock and sand, each fleck like a cell of your skin. I recently heard about the place we used to go when it was too hot to be outside, the one with the fishing lures and shaved ice. Even if they shut their doors for good, our bodies will remember, will hold watermarks of the place in collagen and root for years to come, as if no time had really passed at all. All right. So I'm going to read some poems from the second section now. And like I said before, I feel like the wonderful poets that wrote the blurbs for me described this book so much better than I even could have. So one of my blurb writers wrote, in the second section, we see both the pain of belonging and not belonging as the speaker reveals more and more, first in relation to the bodies around her, as sister, as daughter, then gradually defines herself more and more from her own internal sites of knowledge. So I really think that that captures this selection of poems well. And the first one I'm going to read from this section is called The Washing of the Bodies. I watch you and listen for subtle changes in your voice, altered expressions on your face, signs of the aggression I've known and witnessed. You speak to your children with soft tones, and when you hold them, you are held. All these years, I didn't know about your creek bed body. Like your brother, you've been rootless, subsisting on scraps. Whatever you both went through before I knew you is lost in bone. After all this time, we no longer argue with wrong words. Here in this house, we drink water. Here we break bread. And this one is called Rhythm. I hear cicadas falling from the trees outside my house, their firm bodies striking the concrete like mineral and birdseed. Once my dog shoveled a live cicada into her mouth and held it there, her teeth a cage for the panicked flapping and flitting. Here the dead insects on the sidewalk smell like rainwater I can carry in my skin, a humidity like wet cotton. We've moved so many times that I no longer know the difference between cicadas in this state and that. All I see are their white upturned bellies, iridescent eyes and shells, wings like tissue paper and cheesecloth. Yesterday, the tree outside my living room birthed 5 cicada bodies, and I thought for a moment, if I peeled back the bark and shoved my hands inside, that maybe I too could be born again. And this one is called Occupied. I've never thought of myself as calm. Once a nurse carefully removed an IV from my arm and held pressure. But once the gauze was released, the bloodletting began, and there weren't even enough of us to stop the flood. Things are always bad, as I think they will be. I am aware of the expanding and contracting behind my breastbone in the same way a person with a leak puts a bucket under it. Once the blood flowers begin to form, there's only so much time to stop the bruising from becoming a map of impulse and germinating seed. The point is that I only feel a sense of quiet in the bodies of others, my own mouth made from gun smoke and suture, destined only to wound and be wounded. And this one is called The Introvert. I once walked to the creek near my parents' house with my brothers. Spider climbed down the incline to get to the cool water. We walked slowly and used our hands as sieves to collect mussels from the stream. When it was time to remove our bodies from the water, the creek bed claimed one of my sandals, sucked it down into the mud, so I had to walk home with one wet foot collecting sand from the road. Back home, I realized I am most myself with hands in water. And years later, I visited an aquarium and held my fingers just under the surface of the touch tank water, felt the smooth skin of a stingray, tan body with grayish spots, its outsides flexing and bending as it swam. The air smelled like rubbing alcohol, dirty water, hot concrete. Now I dream of floodwater and humid air, my sleep skin absorbing the moisture of it all. This is a recollection. This is a confession. To be alone with my own water is persistence. Don't look for me. Don't walk into it. All right, and the last one I'm going to read from this middle section is called Scavenger. I am a child. I am incubating at 125 degrees, the heat growing and strengthening my limbs, lungs hardly able to breathe in the humidity, the sides and top of a tent bent inward with water. Our blankets wet with the condensation of hot plants, paper bags scattered on the ground outside the zippered door, animal feet pressed into moist morning dirt like smoke signals from the lake. There are mosquitoes and plastic bags of blueberries and granola, 4 people with aluminum foil over a hot fire, sweat, heat turns to cold in the night as my body grows in the warmth. The animals scavenge for food. If I am born, the trees will take care of the rest. Okay, so I'm going to read just a few more, and these next 2 are from the final section of the book, which really focuses on dealing with illness and loss and grief. So the first one I'm going to read from this section is called Enamel. I remember a tray of grapes and strawberries, some slices of cheese, an old man saying his teeth were going bad, the enamel breaking down so quickly, but not regenerating. The grapes, each individual one, pulled away from its stem, some of them leaving bits of flesh behind, smelled like standing amongst trees, the wind carrying the smell of the river to my face. In a canoe traveling down the river in a drought, the bottom of it catching on the sand, I remember an abandoned couch, trash and bottles floating in the little bit of water left coating the riverbed. The old man in a life jacket, a grandfather, telling us a story about a bridge. I remember thinking it all felt so temporary. Enamel, the paint on the underside of the canoe. All right, and this one is called Field Notes. One, first winter. The day after my birthday, we attend a funeral. Someone left a bottle of iced tea on my windshield, taped to a card with a yellow envelope. Happy birthday to me. 2, first spring. She died on the 19th. All I can think of is my sisterlessness, how there were always so many boys, but only us girls. The plants in my yard start to grow back, but they are only a burden. All I want is to cut it all down and not have it grow back year after year. Old growth, new growth, it's all the same. 3, summer. A child is born. I want to fold her into my body, heal myself with her newness. 4, fall. My skin didn't tan in the summer sun like it used to. Winter came early this year. 5, winter again. My younger brother tells me about the traps that are only for raccoons, says a dog can't get caught in them. He shows me the mechanism, the small cuff that releases and clasps the animal's arm after it has reached the bait. 6, spring again. The only way to ensure plants don't come back, cut them down, dig them up, remove the roots. Okay, and since I don't want to end on such a depressing note, I'm going to return to the first section and read the poem that inspired the book's title. So this one is called Hematology. And I wrote this for my niece at the hospital on the day that she was born. Hematology. When I see my hands, the discrepancy of shape, the way my skin swells with the weather, I remember the frosted ground I was formed from. I've seen new life planted and dug up, a child born not in the usual way. There was summer August heat, thick with water, but no hot blood, no sweat from skin or human sound or breaking of flesh. An unearthing of sorts, a child pronounced girl at birth, a child with a name I felt in my mouth. The girl child and I share something, and if it's heavy breath, I will give her my best air. We'll stay in this place where my labor has been kept. If I exist here, I am most myself. In October, when I smell the nutrients that joined me with someone else, the particles that fill me in the cold. What I'm talking about here is circulation, the harvest of blood. If another girl is born, I will be thankful for one more thing to keep me here. Thank you all so much for listening. Again, if anybody would like a copy, I have some in my office. You can send me an email or just stop by, but I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has any. So thank you all again for listening.
I had the privilege of following along with your book, and I got to see what's so interesting for me about modern poetry, and by modern I mean not Victorian, because that's my field, is the spacing, like where you make the choice to pause in the space and to change lines and stuff. So you have a particular rhythm that you find your voice alone, or do you take, like you talked about Sylvia Plath, right? Like do you take inspiration from other poets when you think about rhythm and spacing?
Yeah, so that is a good question. I think I go back to, so when I was in grad school, and you know, the poet David Dodley, he really like impacted me as a writer, and I always return to things that he told me when I was getting my master's degree in creative writing. And one of the things he always said is, like, as poets, we have this unique ability to use all of these different tools, formatting, and things that are at our disposal that you can't necessarily, I mean, you can do with some fiction writing and prose writing, but his thing was always like, we have these things available, so let's use them. So I have, someone asked me this recently, like, oh, your spacing is so interesting and you use so much like white space and indenting and things. And that really goes back to this idea that I think poetry is this unique genre that you can tell a story in a more interesting way when you use kind of some of these different, you know, affordances that we have. But the other thing is that I would say about that is I really think that the poem needs to sound interesting when it's being read, because I think poetry is written to be read out loud. And so whenever I'm writing a poem, I'm always repeating the lines to myself as I'm writing it. And how does it sound, and where do the pauses go, and how I think that contributes to the story that it tells. So I'm always reading things out loud as I write them, and that helps me to try to figure out where I think I want the spaces or the indenting or the punctuation.
That's amazing. But one of my favorite things to ask writers is, like, you know, not where do you get your inspiration, because that's the kiss of death, but you know, more of like where are you pulling your influences? And I love that you have this connection to this professor who then does you the turn, right, and writes the blurb on the back of your book, which is beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
So you have some questions in the chat, and I will go ahead and read them to you, and we'll answer live. One is from Alice Graves, and who asked Dr. L, did you finally get that velvet copy of Dracula that you wanted?
She's asking me this because Alice worked at Barnes and Noble over winter break, and I had told her that I had seen the book there and I didn't buy it, and I waited, and when I went back it was gone. But yes, I did end up getting it. It is this, I'll just show you because it's really beautiful. But I did end up getting, this is the copy of Dracula. I'm sorry my lighting is so terrible. I really have every light in my house on, but this is yes, the beautiful velvet covered copy of Dracula. So yes, I did get it. It was ended up being a Christmas gift.
I'm deeply jealous. I have an illustrated Jane Eyre that I treasure very deeply. So this is from an anonymous attendee. Do you find writing to be therapeutic?
Yes. So I think that probably is what it does for me. And so I think a lot of the reason that, because I do a lot of different things. So, you know, my master's degree was in creative writing, but my doctorate is in American writing studies. And so I have all of these different interests and things that I like to do, but I think I prioritize my creative writing so much, even now, because I love to do it, but also because it is so therapeutic for me. And I think anybody who's read Hematology knows that there are some, you know, there's a heaviness, I think, to this book, especially in the last section, talking about illness and death and grief and grappling with losing someone very close to you. So I think in a lot of ways, this book was kind of a necessity for me to write because it was so therapeutic and helped me to be able to kind of process the feelings and emotions that I had going on as a result of all of these different things that were going on in my life. So maybe writing is like cheaper than therapy. So it's been really helpful for me in a lot of different ways. So yeah, it's therapeutic and cathartic even. Yeah.
This is from another anonymous attendee. How long have you been working on hematology?
Yes. So, oh my gosh, that's a good question. I kind of have to think about that a little bit. The poems in this book span back to probably some of them are probably as old as maybe like 7 or 8 years that have kind of undergone some revisions over the past few years. But these poems are so close to my heart because they're about my family. They're about people I love and care about, and kind of an exploration of my own identity. And so I really believed in these poems, and they've kind of been part of different manuscripts over the years. But I would say the earliest poems in this book are probably from at least 8 years ago, and some of them are from the past year. So it's kind of a mix of work that I've been doing for almost a decade.
The next question is from Alice Graves. There are a lot of references to water throughout the book. I was wondering if there was a reason or some symbolism behind it.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I do think, yeah, so there are a lot of different themes in this book. I think that water is one of them because, so the title of the book is Hematology, which is the study of blood. And so I chose that title because, not just because of the poem in the book that's called Hematology, but because I saw blood as such an overarching theme throughout the whole book. And I kind of see water as being tied in with that as well. Like water is a source of life, much like blood is. And so I think that's kind of the connection that I saw between the two in these poems, is that it's like another representation of blood and the thing that sustains us. And there's one poem in here that talks a lot about living near water. And so I think that is a part of it as well, because it's always been sort of ironic that every place that I've ever lived in my adult life, at least, has been near water. And so that's been kind of a consistent theme and something that I have integrated into my writing as well, that it's always been, something that has not just literally been something that has sustained me, but something that has been a thing for me to be able to go and be close to and experience nature and write in that environment. So I think it kind of plays a couple roles in these poems. But yes, that's I thank you for noticing that, Alice. Water is comes up quite a bit, almost as much as blood in these poems.
We have several more questions. Are you good to go? We're doing okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
We got a bunch, so.
Awesome.
Here's another one from another anonymous attendee. What was the first poem you wrote for this series?
Oh, the very first poem that I wrote in this book. Oh my gosh. I would have to think about that. I would say probably, I think, actually, no, I think I do know the answer to this. And I have to remember what section it's in. It actually might be in the first one, but it's a poem called Passenger. And so a lot of these poems in here, so I have 2 brothers, and so I write a lot about them in this book and what it was like growing up together and being the middle child and having a younger brother and an older brother. And as I had mentioned, my younger brother was much younger than me, so I felt in a lot of ways like I was taking care of him. And then I think I really struggled a lot with him getting older and just trying to grapple with this idea that he didn't need me anymore, which isn't true, but like in some ways also that he started looking out for me the older he got. And it was just this weird thing for me to experience. And so I wrote this poem about that, similar to Adult Teeth, that's called Passenger. And I can't find it. I'm like flipping through here. I don't even know where my own poems are in this book, but that's probably the oldest one that I wrote in here. And it was about I think it was in the summer of 2013. I had surgery, and my little brother kind of took care of me. I stayed at my parents' house during that time, and he had his driver's license by that point and was driving me around. And it was just like totally a weird experience for me that he was old enough to be able to do that. So if you have a copy of the book, the oldest one in here, I think, is called Passenger. And I think it's part of the first section.
Our next question is also anonymous. Tell us a bit about your writing process, your rituals, and your daily inspiration.
Okay. Yes. So, okay, let me think about this too. I think so. I kind of see myself as being very interdisciplinary, and I just love to do so many things, which is great, but also kind of problematic at the same time because I don't always have the time to devote to things that I would like to. So I'm an artist, and I do artwork, collage work, and painting, and I do photography, and I'm a creative writer. But then, of course, I'm also a professor in our professional writing and rhetoric emphasis, and so I do work in that area as well. So I think the biggest struggle for me is just trying to carve out time to actually create that space to do my writing. I am a night owl, not at all a morning person in any sense of the term, and so I do most of my best writing, I think, in the evenings, sometimes later at night. I work mostly in my office. I have a nice little office space at my house that faces a window that kind of opens up to the neighborhood, which is kind of nice. And it's quiet. And for my birthday, which was last Thursday, my husband got me a really wonderful computer chair for my desk. So I actually feel like I can sit there now and not have back issues from that. But yeah, I think it's just trying to carve out the time to do it. And I unfortunately don't have like a consistent writing schedule that I stick with because I always feel like I have so many other things going on. It kind of fits in whenever I can find the time to do it, but it's usually in the evenings. And I'm currently working on a poetry project right now that sort of builds off some of the themes of hematology and is about the medical internship experience I kind of mentioned at the start of the talk. And so I've had to do quite a bit of research for that project. And so I have like currently my desk is covered with like anatomy and physiology textbooks that I've been using for that. So a lot of times, because I do write a lot about science and medicine, research tends to be a part of my process as well. But yeah, I hope that answered the question. And that's a great question for writers who are trying to figure out what their own writing process is going to look like.
Another anonymous question. It's a two-parter. How long have you been writing, and do you find yourself cringing on your early work?
Yes. So this is all, I love this question because so as I had mentioned, I did a pre-med degree as an undergrad, and then it wasn't until my last year in that I kind of thought, I like writing, maybe I want to explore this more and see where it goes. And so I think I started really seriously writing and thinking about writing for publication probably when I was maybe 22 or 23. And so I enjoyed that. I ended up just loving being an English major and taking those writing classes that I took as a way to kind of explore what I wanted to do with my life. And so I enjoyed that so much that I just went on to get a master's degree in creative writing right after that. And it was a great experience and really helped me to, just practice my craft and get better at writing. But I kept all of those writings from the 2 years that I was in that master's program. And I don't necessarily think it was because I wanted to be able to look back on them, but because I really appreciated seeing all the feedback that was left by my professor and my classmates in our workshops. But yes, now when I look back on them, I think more than being cringy, I don't know that cringy is the right word for it. I think I'm just surprised at how much my style has changed. And then I just write about different things now, because I think at the time I was fresh out of my biology degree and that pre-med experience. And so I didn't even want to think about or write about that stuff. And it took me a couple of years to be able to come back around and be interested in that again. So yeah, I think I've been writing seriously for probably about 10 years now, but yeah, I think more than anything, my style has probably just changed.
This one is another anonymous. What poem took you the longest to finish?
The poem that took me the longest to finish. Oh my goodness. That is a good question. I think I could think of a couple that kind of come to mind that took me a while to finish for different reasons. One, I'm thinking like this just happened to come to mind, but the genetic poems that I wrote for this book, I don't know how well you can see them, but they're kind of arranged in columns. They used to have this really interesting experimental kind of spacing that my publisher ended up coming back and saying, we can't publish it like this because it's not going to fit unless we make the book like quite large. Whereas it looked okay in a virtual or digital environment, it wouldn't have worked for a book this size. And so revising those poems, because I felt so strongly about the formatting of them, the revising of those just those two poems probably took at least a month for me to try to figure out a way to reconfigure them that I was happy with and that I thought would look good in the book. So that comes to mind in terms of revising, but the poem that took the longest to write, I can't say for sure, but I would probably say the poems in the last section that are about the loss of my lifelong best friend who passed away in 2017. A lot of these poems were very difficult to write, I think. And so maybe they took a little bit longer. It was kind of a thing that I would go to when, as someone mentioned earlier, I was in the need of some like therapeutic writing, and I would write a little bit and then leave and come back to it. And so some of the poems in the last section, I think probably took a few months for me to write and revise. So yeah, I think any of these in the back could probably be considered long-term poetry projects.
We have a named person. This is Denise Mckenzie. How do you go about figuring out the perfect title?
Yes. Okay. So hi, Denise. Denise is the president of the Student Writers Union. So thank you for joining us. How do I determine the title of something? So actually, I think this might be the most difficult part for me, at least, of being a poet, because I feel like I put so much into these poems that, and I tend to have some perfectionistic tendencies maybe. And so not maybe, I definitely do, but I think that has been one of the most difficult things for me, is trying to find titles that I think fit with the time and effort I feel like I put into the poem. And a lot of times I'll come up with titles that I end up changing later. I put in the acknowledgements of this book that some of the poems have been published elsewhere under, sometimes in earlier versions and with different names. And that's just because, you know, sometimes in the moment I'll think a title works, and then later on when I'm reading the poem, I see kind of a mismatch between the title and the poem where I don't think it really fits anymore. But I think for me, the way that I really go about creating a title is a lot of times I'll pull something from the poem itself, maybe a line or a couple of words, or maybe I'll think of something that it reminds me of. Or another thing that I have enjoyed doing lately is a lot of times, and I do this with my artwork as well, a lot of times I listen to music while I write, or
problems completing your request. Please try again later.
That is my
have issues, please contact
Alexa
support.
that is apparently thinking that I'm talking to it. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I think that when I listen to music, when I write or create art, a lot of times like certain lyrics or song titles will stick in my head. And so that has become kind of a thing that I have used to title poems that have felt inspiring to me. And I do that with my artwork. Sometimes like the title of a song or a lyric from a song will end up becoming a part of the title because it sort of feels inspired in part by that. But I think ultimately it just has to be something that sounds good to you. And I think sometimes I also do the type of poem where it'll be sort of a line that leads into the first part of the poem. I do that in a few of the poems that come in the back section of the book. But for me, and with poetry, it's all about the way it sounds out loud. And so I will always read things before I consider it complete. And if I feel like it sounds good and it leads well into the poem, then it fits. But don't be afraid to just name something in the moment. I think for me, a lot of times I'll return back to it and end up changing the title in the end because because what fits in that moment might not be what I think of in the associations that come up later. Yeah, so it's a process and something that can kind of change as the poem ages.
This one is from Kelsey France. Do you have a poem that was harder or easier to write than the rest?
Hi, Kelsey. Thank you for coming. It's great that you're here. Yeah, so I think some of the poems, oh my goodness, this is a tough one too. I think a lot of times there are certain moments for me that I just feel like it's such an impactful moment in my life that I just have to sit down and write about it. And I think those are the easiest ones for me to write. And I'm thinking specifically of the hematology poem, like I mentioned. I was in the hospital with my family when my niece was born, and she had just been born. We'd gone back to see her, and then we all went back out to the waiting room. And I just felt like that was such the greatest thing I've ever experienced. I have to write about it, right? And so that poem came really easily to me. And I'm also thinking too, there's a poem in the first section of the book called Middle Child. And this was about I'm sure you all have had these dreams that you just wake up and it was such a terrible dream that it messes up your whole day and kind of impacts the whole rest of your day. And I wrote Middle Child about that. It also felt like one of those poems that I just had to write as kind of a way to process what I had experienced. So that one I felt like came very easy as well. I think just to kind of go back to what I was saying about the last section of the book too. So the last section is just about illness and terminal illness and treatments and all of everything that comes along with that. And so I think in some ways those poems were necessary for me to write, but probably the most difficult, as I mentioned, because some of them I would start writing them and would have to walk away from it and come back later. I think specifically probably the one from this last section that I'm just thinking was maybe the most difficult is the one that's called Sometimes I'll Call You My Sister on page 89. But yeah, that's a good question. Thank you.
This one is from another anonymous. Again, where can I pick up the book? So we're getting some sales here. So
yes, thank you. I'm so glad there's interest. There are copies of the book at Blue Stocking Social, which is on Weinbach in Evansville, next to Honeymoon Coffee and a salon that the name is escaping me at the moment. But there are also copies of the book at Your Brother's Bookstore, which is downtown. It's kind of on the corner of Main and 5th Street. And then, of course, I'm always on campus. You can shoot me an email and I'll have copies in my office that I can sign or that you can just stop by and pick up. So yeah, I would. And you also, I mean, you could order it online as well. So from my publisher's website or from Amazon, copies are available there too.
This one is from Dr. Laura Soderberg, who says, brilliant reading. Speaking of Dracula, do you think of your interest in blood and viscera as drawing on horror influences along with scientific frameworks? Do they overlap?
So thanks, Dr. Soderberg. I think, I don't know that I had ever really thought about that before, but now that you mention it, when I first became an English major, so I had spent, 4 years as a pre-med major, and I wanted to get a master's degree in writing. So I had to wrap up this English degree really fast. So I took all of these classes at 7 or 8 classes a semester to try to knock this out. And so I just remember taking a Gothic literature course as an undergraduate alongside a literature class that was specifically about ghost stories, alongside another class that I can't remember the focus, but we read a lot of books like Dracula. And I remember thinking that was kind of what I was into, the horror genre. And so for the honors program I was a part of, we had to do a thesis project or capstone project at the end. And I ended up doing mine on Gothic literature, but specifically focusing on Edgar Allan Poe and Stephen King. I don't know if you can see all this Stephen King books behind me, but I had never really thought about that. But certainly now that I'm thinking about it, I think that my interest in that area has probably most definitely influenced kind of the focus that I have on blood and the body in a lot of the writing I do. So Yeah, that's a good question. Helps me think about my writing in a new light.
We just have two more. First of all, Alice Graves has informed us that Passenger is on page 36. So for those of you looking for Passenger, thank you, Alice. This is another anonymous one. Are you working on your next book yet?
Yes, I am. So as I had mentioned earlier, I am working on a project that I have sort of tentatively titled Intern Year, about that year that I spent in that internship program, working in various clinical and hospital settings. And it was such a formative experience for me and has impacted me in so many different ways throughout my life that I just felt like it was something I had to write about. And I actually just had an excerpt from that book. So I think it was maybe 7 or 8 poems that I have written so far that were just published as part of the Blood Project. So this is a nonprofit organization that I'm a part of, and they are really focused on building bridges between evidence-based medicine, but also patient care, and trying to add the humanities back into medicine. And so part of their platform is publishing work that's kind of at the intersection of medicine and the humanities. So they just recently featured some poems of mine on their website. So if anybody's interested in kind of getting a sense of what that project is or what it will look like when it's complete, there's a sampling on the Blood Project's website.
And our final question is from Anthony Rentala. What is your white whale? What is the topic or approach that you want to write about or feel like you should that has slipped through your grasp?
Well, I think, so the first thing that comes to mind is I remember in grad school during my master's program, I got married during the first semester of my second year of grad school. And I remember, I don't even know that I really said anything to my professors because I didn't want to make a big deal of it, but I kind of just left for a week and then came back. And I remember saying something to one of my professors about it. And he was like, wait, you got married? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, why don't you write about that? And I was like, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it. And he was like, you really have a tendency to not write about happy things. And I think that's still probably true. And I think this kind of goes back to the idea that someone asked earlier, is your writing therapeutic? And I think maybe that's why I tend to shy away from more, I don't know the right way to say it, positive or happy subjects in my writing, because for me, writing so often is therapeutic and is kind of a way for me to process feelings and events and things that I don't necessarily know how to think about otherwise. Yeah. So maybe a challenge for me would be to try to write about more happy and positive things. Yeah. That's a good reminder.
If we have time for one more question, which is good because we have our last question, which is from another anonymous person. Do you have a dog, and does he or she inspire your poem?
Oh my gosh. I feel like this is someone that probably knows me and knows how much I talk about my dog. Yes, I have a 7-year-old retired racing greyhound named Ruby Soho. And no, I don't, actually, I shouldn't say that I don't write about her, because one of the poems that I read for today that's called Rhythm, I wrote a little bit about her in that, because she used to have a habit. When we lived in Ohio, she would catch cicadas on our front sidewalk and put them in her mouth and try to eat them. Sometimes she would just play with them, and it was really gross. So I kind of integrated part of that into that poem, but no, I don't often write about her, and maybe I should, because she does bring me so much joy. This kind of goes back to the previous question, especially, I'm just thinking too, so this past year, she was diagnosed with cancer, and we had to go through the whole cancer treatment journey with her, and it was really hard and terrible. And so that seems more up my alley of something that I would typically write about, but I haven't yet. But she is sitting right here listening to my poetry. So she should be an inspiration. She's usually hanging out whenever I'm writing.
I got to meet Ruby Soho. She's very cool. So
Yeah,
I think that's it. So Dr. LaFollette, thank you so much for doing this reading and taking time. And talking to us, and thank you all for coming so much. We really appreciate you, and sorry about the rescheduling, but we're glad you were here with us. And Dr. LaFollette, do you have any final words you want to share with us?
I just want to say I am incredibly grateful for all of your very, very thoughtful questions. I never expected to be answering questions for a half an hour, but I love that. I love talking about writing and the process. So I just thank you all for being such great listeners and asking such good questions. And I hope if you haven't already that you'll read the book, but thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
And we have some people in the chat saying thank you and congratulations. So
thank you all
you
so
guys
much.
be careful. It's very cold outside, so be careful in the rain and the cold. Dr. LaFollette, thank you once more.
Thank you.
You're amazing. I'm so happy you're my colleague. So thank you all for coming.